Hey, gang, this is Carl White, and I am transmitting today here in the studios for when you are listening to the Author Showcase, which is the podcast that is sponsored by and done by and put together in the brainchild of the Scotsman's Guide. And we are interviewing today Miss Pam Henrick. Now, as you may or may not know, the Scotsman's Guide actually has two separate divisions. They have the residential and the commercial division. And today we're interviewing Pam, who wrote a great article in the January residential edition of the Scotsman Guide. And the article was called "Prevent the Dreaded Loan Buyback." And Pam, you're president of Incenter Diligence Solutions. We'll ask you a little bit more about that later. But prevent the dreaded loan buyback. Um, Gosh, that even just loan buyback just sounds like something to dread, doesn't it?
It sounds ominous, doesn't it, Carl?
It does. I was going to say it sounds like a thorn in the foot, but it's more like an amputated leg, probably than a thorn, a thorn
Yes,
in the foot.
you're
So,
right.
once you give us, I think everybody kind of sort of knows what a loan buyback is, but once you
Mhm.
kind of give us a 30,000 foot view on the concept of a loan buyback and why it's considered dreaded in the mortgage industry, but frankly, by all parties.
Sure, absolutely. Well, first, I wanted to thank you for having me on your podcast. I'm excited to have the opportunity to talk to you and your listeners, and also to speak about this subject because it is one that is very important. I don't think it's a topic that a lot of people in the mortgage origination business think about because very often the buybacks are handled at another level after the loan is originated and funded and sold. But as we know, almost all loans end up getting sold on the secondary market. And there are representations and warranties that go along with the sale of those loans. And as a result, there are some different triggers that could cause the buyer to take another look at the loan and make a determination as to whether or not the loan actually met the requirements of both originating and closing and funding. And sometimes those triggers are just random samples where they, look at a random list of loans, compare them to origination protocols and guidelines, and make sure that the documentation meets the requirements. But sometimes a trigger could be that a borrower has missed a payment. So either the first payment, which would be considered a first payment default, or any of the payments within a prescribed period of time, which is typically called an early payment default. And, I think historically it's viewed that if a borrower defaults, there is a much higher possibility that something was missed in the origination process. And so all of those things, or any of those things, could cause the buyer to try and put the loan back to the seller. So, so that's the kind of the background of the mortgage buyback.
And so a mortgage buyback, like and I'm going to use air quotes here when I say the average mortgage company.
Mhm.
On my carlsmortgagecompany.com, which is a made up, don't go to that .com because there's nothing there. But carlsmortgagecompany.com, if I buy back a loan, what is that costing me in like real dollars?
Well, the average has been in the neighborhood of $100,000.
Okay.
And, so of course the average means that it could be significantly higher than $100,000 and it could be a little bit less than $100,000. But either way, that's a lot of money. And, if you are one of the top banks in the country, maybe that one loan doesn't hurt so much. But to the average mortgage loan origination company, that can be incredibly damaging to the bottom line, especially these days when mortgage originators and mortgage companies are struggling, to make profits on loans. Again, that can really eat into the balance sheet.
Yeah. Yeah, because when I first read this, like when I read the articles in preparation for what we're doing here today, sometimes I try to put I try to wear the shoes of the average loan officers listening with this, and I'll be honest with you, the first thought that came in my mind as a loan officer might be like, who cares? How does
Yeah,
that affect me? But number
sure.
one, it sometimes this is not thrown, but handed to the loan officer if there was find out there was something that he or she made a mistake. And number
Hmm.
two, if like you said, if the mortgage companies are operating on thin margins right now, which they are, and
Hmm.
a handful of these could really be a detriment, and they close up. Not like everybody loses their job, which is never any good. So this is a big deal, even for people like I always focus on the sales part of it, but that's like having a race car with an engine but no brakes. If you don't pump the brakes every now and then, you're going to hit the wall.
Sure,
So
sure.
anyway, so
Well,
what
and
are some?
oh, I'm sorry. I was going to say, and as an originator, what's important for you is repeat business. And so you want to be able to go back to your clients and talk about the next thing you can help them with. Are you going to buy an investment property? Are you going to buy a second home? Or can we refinance a loan for you? What you don't want to have to go back to the borrower for is, hey, on this loan that we made for you 6 months or a year ago, there's actually a problem and now I need more documentation. There's nothing that's going to make a customer more frustrated than having to go back on a transaction that they thought was all done and finished
Yeah.
and now have to go and try and provide additional documentation.
What do you mean I need another pay stub? I thought we
Right,
were done with this. So
right.
that's a great point. What are some of the common I don't know what the right word is, loan defects, I guess.
Mhm.
What's some of the common loan defects that leads to buyback request, and I guess part two is how can they be prevented?
Sure. That's a great question. I think, one of the things that comes up the most is appraisal deficiencies, because at the end of the day, the appraisal, when there is one, because we know there are transactions that don't require an appraisal, but those are really what kind of defines how much risk is associated with a loan. How much, if a lender or servicer has to end up foreclosing on a property, are they going to be able to get their money back? And
Hmm.
so appraisals are looked at very thoroughly to make sure that the comps that were used are the best representation of the subject property. Things like, were there other comps available that maybe the appraiser didn't use? And sometimes that's for a reason, because we're trying to get to a certain value. But sometimes there are very valid reasons, which is, even though a comp looks like in proximity, it might be the best property to use, it's not the most representative of what the subject property looks like. So
Hmm.
I would say appraisals, value, and all of that is, probably number one. And then separate from that is borrower's income and employment.
Hmm.
So, there are things that will trigger a loan to be bought back that are really outside of everybody's control and have nothing to do with the origination of the loan. So, for example, you could originate the best loan in the world, and 3 months later, a borrower loses his or her job, and they're the primary wage earner. And that can be fairly devastating for people and can cause somebody to go delinquent on their loan. And again, that's just an unforeseen thing. But there are a lot of other things that you can tell by looking at the documentation. And I think what we saw over the last couple of years is that the instances of mortgage buybacks really peaked during the pandemic, kind of following the beginning of the pandemic. And as we all know, there was so much volume flooding the industry. And most mortgage companies were hiring a lot of people to try and keep up with that volume. And turn times were getting extended and all of that. And so, people were, in some cases, there were newer employees that were looking at some of these loan qualification documents, and in some cases, just, trying to get the loan done, and things are missed.
Yeah.
So the whole notion of a mortgage buyback is to it doesn't feel like this is the purpose of it or the quality control that goes along with it, but it's to identify those things that maybe an originator can put some guardrails around to prevent future buybacks. And when we talk about buybacks also, particularly with Fannie and Freddie, and this is usually with independent investors as well, a lender doesn't just get a letter that says, hey, buy back the loan and you buy it back. There is a bit of a back and forth because sometimes maybe it looks like the loan needs to be bought back because not all of the documentation got included in the package that got delivered, or sometimes there's a difference of opinion as to how you look at income or those types of things. So I don't think when it comes to loan buybacks, the end investor doesn't want to have to try and put a loan back to the originator either. But at the same time, they don't want to get stuck with a loan that is potentially going to create losses on their books if it has violated some, common underwriting practice.
Yeah. Now, I in reading it, you were mentioning a process that's called a pre-funding quality control review.
Yes.
And so just by the name of it, it's like pre-fund. It's like before it closes, we're doing a little review. Like how does that process work, and like what does it cover? Is it like just like taking an analysis of the underwriting and just to make sure they checked all the boxes kind of thing?
It's a little bit deeper than that, but basically there are two kinds of reviews that are now required by the agencies. And they have some very specific parameters about the number of loans you have to look at and the timing and all of that. And that's to sell to Fannie and Freddie. FHA and VA have always had their own process. So, but pre-funding QC is exactly what you said. It's done before the loan funds. And there is a bit of a tricky timing element to it because also, as we all know, sometimes, loans get all the way up to that cleared to close process and need to close right away. And when you insert this pre-funding QC element in there, it takes a little bit of time. So, so those have to be done quickly, but they also have to be done efficiently. And essentially what you're doing, whether it's being done with internal staff or it's being done with an outsourced company, is the review is being done to look at the documentation that was used in underwriting and closing the loan to make sure that it includes everything that was required, and also that the calculations used from that documentation are accurate, and all of it ties back to the approval of the loan. So essentially, that process is saying, if you close the loan this way and something doesn't get messed up in the actual closing process, your loan should be good, barring those unforeseen circumstances that we were talking about before.
Yeah. So it seems like obviously, shouldn't say obviously, but maybe that if you're conducting one of these reviews, that it can't be done by the very underwriter that did it the first time, or even I guess processor. So like, am I on the same page here? Like we can't, yeah, because it's like me auditing my own taxes, even though that sounds very nice to me, right? Maybe we'll edit that part out. Let's not even interject that to the universe to happen here. But so how does it work then? So like you take a shop like mine, for instance, right? And so on any given month, I'll do probably like our team, I don't know. I think last month of January, I think we were like at 85 million or 90 million or something, somewhere in that range. So here we are, relatively speaking, a small shop compared to Wells Fargo, Bank of America, of course. How does the little guys like us pull it off?
Well, there are a couple of different ways, and you're absolutely right that it's not a good practice to do that pre-funding QC review or post-funding with the same group of people that are making the decisions on the loan. So that is a little bit of a tricky part for smaller organizations, because you either have to hire people that have this specific role that are non-revenue producing people, if you will, to insert themselves in the middle of the process to do this, or you can outsource it. Outsourcing, I believe, has become more of the makes sense way to do it, because for a company like yours, if you, let's just say what you said, the 85 million is 300 loans. So 300 loans doesn't come in through the month, 15 loans every day in a 20 workday month. So to manage that workflow is a little bit tricky from a staff perspective. So you might have somebody sitting around for a couple of days with nothing to do from a pre-funding QC perspective, and then have more than they can handle at another time of the month.
Yeah.
But really what it looks like is that, again, at the point that the loan is cleared to close, this other party takes the loan, reviews everything, and if they find deficiencies, push the deficiencies back to the underwriter, processor, sometimes the loan originator, to cure those before the loan moves forward. Really, if you're using this process in the best way, it's not just one of those painful things that you have to go through in order to get your loan closed. You use it as a tool to identify, do we have trends in our organization, in our processing, origination, or underwriting, where we need to put something in place to stop these things from happening along the way and learn from it. And I think the organizations that do the best with this look at it as not something punitive, but something that really can help them originate more loans and better loans. Because again, like we talked about at the beginning, you don't want to have to go back to your customer way down the road and ask them for additional documentation, because when they think about a future transaction, they may remember that and say, I don't know if I want to go and talk to Carl again, because 6 months after he closed my loan, he came back to me for more stuff. And that makes me wonder if he knows what he was doing to begin with.
Yeah. It just seems like there's it's a seesaw or balancing act of, um, balancing the need for quality control with the desire to, expedite the loan origination process, so we can, our advertising, we close and, insert in days, kind of thing,
Sure.
makes way better advertising than we promise not to call you up 6 months later and ask for a pay stub, So it's a balancing act. But I guess the important thing to understand is it's a balancing act that's got $100,000 price tag on it if you screw it up. Let me ask you, so what do we do about like, so again, sometimes in my shop we'll hire newer most of the time it's experienced loan officer already with a book of business, but every now and then we see the right fire in their eyes, right?
Sure. Yeah.
When a lady or a gentleman comes in and applies, and they're new or newer in the business, and you just get this sense this person's on fire, but they're going to make more mistakes for sure. Like, how do you balance that part? Like, what do you do about these, like a new loan officer?
Sure.
They're going to make more mistakes, I would guess.
Absolutely. Of course, training is critical all along the way. There's so much to a mortgage transaction. And it's not like you just hit the easy button and it, goes from taking an application to funding a loan. There are lots of loan programs, lots of borrower scenarios. And so, it is important that we provide the proper amount of training, and also know that people are not going to know everything. There's no way, even you and I, who have been in the business for a long time, learn new things every day. But I think what's key to a good mortgage origination process, and I'm talking about from the very first interaction with the customer, is that everything that happens beyond that, it's always, kind of that trust but verify methodology. So meaning that you don't just take an application and make the assumption that because there's a bunch of information on it, it's accurate. You're getting documentation to confirm that the information on the application is accurate. And then the processor is gathering a lot of documentation in addition to the loan originator. And then the underwriter's job is to verify everything that the originator and the processor have put together. And then closing has a similar role in making sure that certain things happen. So it's, we're always kind of checking the checker, if you will, when it comes to that process. And if something doesn't feel right, then dig into it more and make sure you get to a point where you can feel as comfortable as possible with it before you move that loan forward.
Yeah, when you mentioned easy button, I thought, oh, maybe she sells easy buttons. I'd love to buy some of those. So, but apparently that's there is no easy button like you said. So,
No.
hey, I always like to leave here with a I don't know, some actionable thing of some sort. What advice would you give to the mortgage loan officer to help them understand the importance of quality control in our work? It's not just about how many units I can rank up for the month or how much volume I can have in the month. Give me one piece of advice or something to understand the importance of this.
Sure. I think every mortgage origination company has a responsibility to its employees to make sure that they are creating an environment where people can be successful. And that's a two-way street, because a mortgage company can only ensure that for its employees if everybody along the way is doing their part. And quality starts with the loan originator, and it makes its way all the way through the process. And as individuals, it's important that we don't just think about our part and what we're going to get paid on our part, but the longevity of the company and the company's ability to continue and have a profitable environment and a profitable company that can grow and withstand some of the challenging times in the mortgage industry that we're in right now.
Yeah, that's for sure. One thing I've learned is, yeah, if we screw something up and we kill the goose, there's no more eggs, right? And then
That's right.
everybody's out of a job. So,
That's
so
right.
great point. Well, Pam, I really appreciate you coming on here and great information. So you're the president of Incenter Diligence Solutions.
Yes.
What do you guys do?
Sure. So Incenter Diligence Solutions really has four main focuses. So we do third-party review underwriting for the purpose of companies that are going to ultimately be selling loans to investors and sometimes securitizing. But we also act as a third-party review firm to help the originating company know that if they're going to sell a loan to another company, to another investor, that the loan meets the guidelines and it should get purchased without any issue. We also do MSR reviews, which is very active these days with the selling of mortgage servicing rights. And then the service that I think is the most relevant to this conversation is we do both pre and post funding QC reviews for other companies. So we are that third party that can jump in there and help get these reviews done and help guide companies as to what are the types of things that they might want to look to implement. And then the fourth thing separately is we do document management, which is document indexing and data extraction. So Incenter Diligence takes you from really the beginning of the transaction and working with originators all the way through the end of the secondary marketing transactions.
So there is an easy button. Uh-huh. I see how you slid that in there. That's really because as I was reading this article, I went, well, what about us? Like what do we do? I got to go hire and I wouldn't call us small as we're small compared to Bank of America, perhaps, but
Sure.
throughout the typical mortgage company round, I mean, there's some people a lot smaller than us that,
Absolutely.
man, when we're trying to make sure you got a margin for a profit in there, and you got to hire a full-time person just to do
Yeah.
one or two to do this. So very good,
Mhm.
nice stuff. Hey, if
Yeah.
somebody wants to reach out to you, Pam, what's the best way to do that?
Sure. So our website is incenterdiligence.com. And separate from that, we're on LinkedIn as Incenter Diligence Solutions. I personally am on LinkedIn, and we'd love to talk to anybody about any of these services or any other questions or topics that they might have.
All right, very good. Pam Hamrick, thank you so much. Hey, for our listeners, thank you so much for listening in to the Author Showcase that myself, Carl White, and our sponsor that takes care of all this and produces it over at the Scotsman's Guide. We appreciate those guys. But thank you so much for listening. And the only thing that we ask in return, if you just refer this episode to 3 of your favorite loan officer friends, they'll thank you for it. We'll thank you for it. And we'll see you on the next episode of Author Showcase. Thanks again, everybody. Bye-bye.